Imagine committing the perfect crime. No evidence, no witnesses, and no one suspects a thing. But what if the one person you fooled wasn't even alive? Stick around for a horror story so twisted, it'll leave you questioning reality itself. Some people believe the perfect crime is impossible. Too many variables, too many chances to slip up. But every once in a while, someone pulls it off, or so they think. This is the story of Daniel Carver, a man who committed a murder so flawless, no one suspected a thing. Not the police, not his neighbors, not even his own wife, until it was too late. Settle in, because this tale isn't just about a crime. It's about what happens when the dead refuse to stay silent. Daniel Carver lived in a quiet suburb just outside Chicago, a place where the houses all looked the same, and the biggest scandal was a missing lawn gnome. He was 42, an accountant with a receding hairline and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. To everyone else, he was ordinary, but Daniel had a secret. For years, he'd been planning to kill his wife, Eleanor. Eleanor was the kind of woman who lit up a room. Beautiful, kind, always baking cookies for the neighbors. But to Daniel, she was a chain around his neck. She controlled the money, the house, his life. And worse, she'd started asking questions about the late nights he claimed were work. He couldn't risk her finding out about the gambling debts, or the mistress he'd been hiding for months. So, Daniel crafted a plan. No messy weapons, no suspicious alibis. He'd make it look like an accident, a gas leak in their old Victorian home. Simple, clean, untraceable. He spent weeks studying the furnace, rigging it just right. On November 12th, a cold Friday night, he set it in motion. He kissed Eleanor goodnight, slipped out to grab milk, and waited. An hour later, the explosion rocked the street. Flames swallowed the house. By the time firefighters arrived, Eleanor was gone, reduced to ash. The coroner called it a tragedy. The police ruled it an accident. And Daniel? He played the grieving widower perfectly. Tears on cue, a trembling voice at the funeral. The insurance payout was wired to his account within a month. He'd done it. The perfect crime. For the next few weeks, Daniel was untouchable. He moved into a sleek new apartment downtown, paid off his debts, and started taking his mistress, Claire, out in public. Life was good, but then things got strange. It started with the mirrors. Every time Daniel passed one, he'd catch a flicker, just for a second, of Eleanor's face staring back at him. Not his reflection, hers. Pale, unblinking, her lips pressed into a thin line. He'd blink, and it'd be gone. Grief, he told himself. Guilt playing tricks. But it didn't stop there. At night, he'd hear footsteps pacing the apartment, slow, deliberate, like someone was circling his bed. He'd wake up to the smell of her lavender perfume lingering in the air. Once, he found the kitchen faucet running, dripping steadily, though he lived alone. Claire noticed it too. "This place feels off," she'd say, rubbing her arms like she was cold. Daniel laughed it off, but deep down, he knew something was wrong. Then came the phone calls. Late at night, his cell would ring, no caller ID. He'd answer, and there'd be nothing but static, and faintly, so faint he could barely hear it, a woman's voice whispering his name. Daniel, Daniel. He'd hang up, heart pounding, telling himself it was a prank. But the calls kept coming. By December, he was a wreck, jumpy, sleepless, snapping at Claire. He started drinking to dull the edges, but even that didn't help. One night, half drunk, he screamed into the empty apartment, "Leave me alone." The lights flickered, and then, clear as day, he heard it, a voice from the hallway. "You can't hide, Daniel." It was Eleanor. He'd know that voice anywhere. Daniel couldn't take it anymore. He packed a bag, told Claire he was leaving town, and drove 3 hours to a cheap motel off the highway. No mirrors, no phones, just a bed and a locked door. He thought he'd escaped. But that night, as he lay in the dark, the TV flickered on by itself. Static filled the screen, and through the noise, Eleanor's face appeared, distorted, her eyes black voids, her mouth stretched into a scream. "You thought you'd won," she hissed, her voice crackling through the speakers. "But I knew, Daniel. I always knew." He yanked the plug from the wall, but the screen stayed on. Trembling, he stumbled to the bathroom and froze. Written in fog on the mirror were 3 words, "Look behind you." He spun around. Nothing, just the empty room. But when he turned back, the mirror wasn't empty anymore. Eleanor stood there, inches from the glass, her head tilted, her skin gray and peeling. She smiled, a slow, horrible smile, and whispered, "You didn't kill me." Daniel staggered back, his mind racing. That couldn't be true. He'd seen the house burn. He'd planned it perfectly. But then it hit him, the memory he'd buried. That night, Eleanor had been acting strange. She'd insisted on staying up late, watching him with those sharp, knowing eyes. Had she suspected? The room grew cold. The lights dimmed, and from the shadows, he heard her laugh, a low, guttural sound that wasn't human anymore. "I switched the valves, Daniel," she said, her voice echoing inside his skull. "You didn't kill me. You killed yourself." Daniel's body was found the next morning by the motel maid, sprawled on the floor, eyes wide, mouth frozen in a scream. The coroner ruled it a heart attack. No one could explain the burns on his hands or the faint smell of gas in the room. Claire vanished, the insurance money untouched. Back in the suburbs, neighbors swore they saw lights flickering in the ruins of the Carver house. Some claimed they heard a woman's voice calling out at night, not in fear, but in triumph. The perfect crime? Maybe, but perfection comes at a price. And for Daniel Carver, that price was realizing too late that the dead don't forgive and they don't forget. What do you think? Could you pull off a crime that flawless? Or would you end up like Daniel, trapped by the one you try to bury? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this twisted tale, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Until next time, sleep tight.